Stavros Papadakis is 97 years old. Every morning at 6 a.m., he walks down the same steep hill in Ikarian, Greece, carries a bag of groceries back up, and then spends an hour in his kitchen garden pulling weeds. He does this without a walking aid, without stopping, and without thinking about it. He has been doing it for so long that it never crossed his mind to call it exercise. It is just morning. Now meet David. He is 54. He lives in Phoenix, Arizona, reads everything he can find about Blue Zone diets, shops at Whole Foods twice a week, and takes 7 different supplements his cardiologist recommended. He meal preps on Sundays. He tracks his macros. By almost every conventional measure, David is doing the right things. Last spring, he was told his inflammatory markers were still elevated. His fasting glucose hadn't moved in 2 years. His doctor said they should talk about medication. David is not failing because he lacks discipline. He is failing because nobody told him that the Blue Zone diet doesn't travel, not in the form we've been sold it. Here's what I mean. In 2018, researchers at the University of Minnesota published an analysis of what happens when Western populations adopt traditional Blue Zone eating patterns without changing anything else about how they live. The results were underwhelming, not because the food was wrong, because the food alone was never the whole story. Americans spend roughly $35 billion a year on supplements marketed for longevity, resveratrol, NMN, NAD precursors. The people in Ikarian have never heard of any of those compounds. Stavros doesn't take a single pill. His C-reactive protein levels at his last check were lower than the average Americans in their mid-30s. There's one thing Stavros does every single day that ties all of this together. It's not a food. It's not a supplement. And when I first read the research on it, I almost missed it because it seemed too ordinary to be the answer. I'll come back to it. It's worth waiting for. If you've read anything about Blue Zones, you've been told to eat more legumes, more leafy greens, more whole grains, less meat, and ideally something purple. That advice is everywhere. And it is not wrong, exactly. But there's a piece of guidance that accompanies it, almost always unspoken, that makes the difference between food that works and food that just sits in your body being food. The assumption is this: the ingredients are the medicine. Get the ingredients right and the rest follows. I believe that too. Then I went back to the primary research. In 2023, the PREDIMED-Plus trial, a Spanish study tracking over 6,800 adults across 7 years, found something that the headlines mostly ignored. Participants who adopted Mediterranean-style eating in combination with changes to their daily movement and social patterns showed C-reactive protein reductions nearly 3 times greater than participants who changed their diet alone. The food mattered, but the food worked differently when the rest of life changed around it. Think about what that actually means. The same bowl of beans, the same olive oil, the same leafy greens, 3 times the anti-inflammatory effect when the context changed. Americans spend billions trying to isolate the active compound. The active compound is the whole life. So let me show you what that actually looks like in practice, starting with the piece that surprises most people, because it's not really about adding anything new. When Stavros eats lunch, he eats horta, wild greens, usually boiled, dressed with olive oil and lemon juice. He's eaten them for his entire life. The specific greens change by season: dandelion, chicory, purslane, amaranth, but the ritual doesn't. He sits down. He eats slowly. He has a small glass of wine sometimes. The meal takes 40 minutes, not because there's a lot of food, but because that's just how long meals take in Ikarian. Here is what's happening biologically. The greens he's eating, particularly purslane and dandelion, contain one of the highest plant-based concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids measured in any food group. A 2021 study in the British Journal of Nutrition found that purslane contains up to 400 milligrams of ELA omega-3s per 100 grams, which is comparable to some fatty fish servings. Most people in the West have never eaten purslane. Most people in Ikarian eat it 2 or 3 times a week without thinking of it as anything special. But that's not the full picture. The way Stavros eats horta matters as much as the horta itself. He doesn't eat it in a salad topped with croutons and bottled dressing. He boils it, blanching and boiling leafy greens, something Greek cooks have done for centuries, dramatically increases the bioavailability of certain phenolic compounds and breaks down oxalates that would otherwise interfere with mineral absorption. A 2019 study in the journal Food Chemistry measured phenolic content across raw versus cooked wild greens and found that light boiling increased total antioxidant capacity in chicory by 38%. The preparation is not optional. It is part of why it works. What you can do tonight: get 200 grams of dandelion greens or purslane from any farmer's market or ethnic grocery store. Most Latin and Asian markets carry both. Boil them for 4 to 6 minutes, no more. Drain them. Dress with 2 tablespoons of cold-pressed olive oil and the juice of half a lemon, both added after cooking, not during. Eat this as your main vegetable at lunch or dinner 3 times this week. That's the baseline. The mistake I see constantly is that people add these greens to an existing meal, tossed into a Caesar salad, blended into a smoothie. That's not how it works here. The horta is the meal, or the center of it. It's not a garnish. Before you do anything else with this, ask yourself honestly, when was the last time a plant was the center of your plate? Not a side dish, not a garnish, but the actual point of the meal? If you can't remember, you have your answer. This matters. But here's what I find fascinating. The research in Ikarian suggests the greens are only working the way they do because of something that happens around the meal, not inside it. Here is the piece most Blue Zone content skips entirely. Stavros eats lunch at 1 p.m. After lunch, he rests. Not a full sleep. He would disagree if you called it a nap, but 20 to 30 minutes of quiet, horizontal, lights-off rest. He has done this every day for as long as he can remember. Every person in his village does it. The caffeinio closes at 1:30 p.m. The streets go quiet. This is not cultural laziness. The physiology here is specific. A 2007 study published in the Archives of Internal Medicine followed 23,681 Greek adults over 6 years and found that those who napped regularly, at least 3 times per week for an average of 30 minutes, had a 37% lower risk of dying from heart disease than those who didn't. The association held even after controlling for diet, exercise, and smoking status. The researchers concluded that the nap itself, independent of other factors, was doing something measurable. The mechanism connects directly to cortisol. After the midday meal, cortisol, your primary stress hormone, peaks for the second time in the day. In the absence of a rest period, that cortisol surge keeps inflammatory pathways elevated for the next 4 to 6 hours. The horta stavros just ate is trying to work against an inflammatory background that stress is constantly refreshing. In the West, we eat our omega-3s. Then we sit in a meeting for 3 hours. The food cannot fully compete with that. It's trying to run uphill. In Ikarian, the rest period is not a luxury. It is the mechanism by which the body actually processes and benefits from everything eaten at lunch. The anti-inflammatory compounds in the greens are doing their work while the nervous system is in a state that allows them to work. You do not need to take a 30-minute nap every day to start seeing this effect. But you do need to stop eating your best food in the middle of your most stressful hours and expecting it to perform. A practical adjustment. If a midday rest is impossible where you live and work, try this instead. After lunch, take a 10-minute walk, not for exercise, but slow, without your phone, without checking anything. Research from Stanford published in 2022 found that a 10-minute post-meal walk reduced postprandial glucose spikes by an average of 12% compared to sitting. It's not the same as the Ikarian nap, but it pulls you in the same direction, out of cortisol-driven sympathetic activation and into a state where digestion and anti-inflammatory processes can actually run. This is where the 2 pieces connect. The greens are the input. The rest, or the walk, is the condition under which the input becomes output. Most people in the West are buying high-quality ingredients and then creating biological conditions where those ingredients can't do their jobs. That's the gap. At this point, you understand more about why Ikarian longevity actually works than most of what's been published about it in popular health media. But there's one more thing, and this is the piece I promised you at the start. The part the researchers almost missed because it looked too simple to be worth noting. What we do in the West, we eat breakfast alone in our cars or at our desks, spend $180 a month on protein powders and nootropics, book 45-minute therapy sessions we schedule 2 weeks in advance, treat sleep as a productivity variable, and call the friend we've been meaning to call soon. Americans spend approximately $4.5 billion a year on sleep aids. The Ikarians I've read about don't have a word in regular use for insomnia. They don't need one. What the Ikarians do, they cook together, eat together, argue about recipes, walk to the neighbor's house uninvited, and stay until the conversation is done. Nobody tracks how long the meal took. Nobody checks their phone. They didn't build a wellness routine. They never needed one, because their life didn't dismantle them the way ours does. Here's what I promised you, and I want to be honest. When I first came across this in the research, I almost wrote it off. It seemed too soft, too vague, not enough of a mechanism. The thing Stavros does every single day isn't a food or a supplement. It's this: he eats with other people. Every meal, or close to it. Breakfast sometimes alone, but lunch and dinner, always with someone. His wife, his daughter-in-law, a neighbor who stopped by, the man he has known since childhood. That seems obvious until you look at what it's doing inside the body. A 2017 study from the University of Oxford, Robin Dunbar's Social Neuroscience Research Group, found that communal eating is one of the strongest predictors of life satisfaction, social bonding, and self-reported health across cultures, independent of what was actually eaten. The act of eating together, sitting face-to-face with someone you know, triggers oxytocin release and activates the vagal nerve, the primary pathway through which the brain regulates inflammation. Your vagus nerve is not a metaphor. It is a physical cable running from your brainstem through your chest and into your gut, and it is the main regulator of your parasympathetic, anti-inflammatory state. When it is activated, your gut microbiome diversifies, your cortisol drops, and your immune system shifts from inflammatory to adaptive mode. The foods you eat in that state are processed differently than the foods you eat alone, stressed, scrolling. The researchers almost published this finding as a footnote about social behavior. It should have been the headline of the entire Blue Zone literature. Because what it means is this: the longevity foods work best when the conditions of eating them are themselves therapeutic. You can eat Horta alone at your desk, and it will help, but you are eating it with the vagus nerve in the wrong gear. The Okinawans understood this through their Moai circles, small social groups that ate together throughout life. The Sardinians through multi-generational dinners that lasted hours. The Ikarians through an open-door culture where dropping in on someone at mealtime was not rude. It was the point. None of them built this deliberately. They didn't read a study about vagal tone and decide to eat together. They ate together because that's how humans lived for 200,000 years, and they just never stopped. We stopped, and we replaced it with better supplements. Here's what honest expectation looks like if you start making these changes. In the first week, you probably won't notice much. Some people report that their digestion feels a little calmer, less bloating after dinner, maybe better sleep. Don't read too much into it. Your body is just adjusting to different inputs. At 30 days, something starts to quiet down. Cravings for processed food tend to soften, not disappear, but soften. This is the oligosaccharides in the greens beginning to shift your gut microbiome. The craving change is a signal, not a transformation. At 60 days, ask your doctor to run a basic panel. C-reactive protein, fasting glucose, HbA1c, triglycerides. If you have a baseline from the past year, compare it. The research suggests this is the window where measurable shifts begin to show up in blood work for most people who have made consistent changes. And I mean consistent, not perfect. At 90 days, if you've eaten the greens 3 times a week, protected 20 minutes after lunch, and started eating at least some of your meals with another person, this probably doesn't feel like a program anymore. It just feels like how you eat. I want to be straight with you. This isn't magic. It's food, patience, and consistency. I'm not going to tell you it will fix everything. It won't. But the evidence behind it is stronger than most of what gets sold in supplement form, and the only side effects are better food and more time with people you like. Will your experience match Stavros's exactly? No. You're starting from a different place, in a different environment, with a different history. But the question isn't whether you can become Ikarian. The question is whether you can close a little of the gap. The research says you can. Stavros is still walking that hill this morning. He has no idea I've been thinking about his breakfast routine for the last 3 weeks. In Ikarian, what he does isn't remarkable. It's ordinary. And that's the most extraordinary part. Not that he has found some secret, but that he has simply never stopped doing the things that humans were built to do. You're building this from scratch, in a world designed to make it harder. That's not a disadvantage. It means you understand why you're doing it. which is something Stavros never had to think about. Tonight, go to a Latin or Asian market and buy a bunch of dandelion greens or purslane. Boil them for 5 minutes. Dress them with olive oil and lemon. Eat them at a table with someone if you can. That's where this starts. I post a new piece of this research every single day. If you want to keep going deeper, subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another Blue Zone, another centenarian, and another layer of this that most health channels never get to. And if you've been doing any version of this already, eating more wild greens, changing when and how you eat, tell me what you've noticed. I read every single comment. Drop it below.